150, 40, 30, 20, 10. Butter.
A tragic wreck occurred on Amtrak's Northeast Corridor in Chase, Maryland. The scene shows mangled train cars and locomotives lying across the tracks. Hundreds were injured and several were killed. Emergency responders were overwhelmed. But how could a wreck like this happen? I'll tell you. Amtrak's Northeast Corridor is the busiest main line in the United States. It sees over 600 passenger trains a day, mostly from Amtrak, but also from smaller or regional commuters or agencies like New Jersey Transit or MARC. These trains are always running about 100 miles an hour or close to, roughly about 70 or 80. However, these trains also have to share the line with slower freight trains, normally running at speeds of 60 to 70 miles per hour, depending on the top speed of the locomotives. These trains usually run slower because of their length and weight difference. Now, normally when everyone's obeying signals and stuff, nothing will go wrong. But on this day, January 4th, 1987, 3 Conrail locomotives ran a signal, and the consequences were deadly. On January 4th, 1987, Amtrak train number 94, the Colonial, was speeding down the Northeast Corridor at 125 miles per hour. The train had left Washington Union Station at 12:30 p.m., bound for Boston South Station. There were 665 people on board the train, 660 passengers, and 5 crew members. The train was led by 2 relatively new EMD AEM-7s, numbers 900 and 903. 900 was the testbed unit for the type, and 903 was leading the train. Meanwhile, at Conrail's Bayview Yard, a trio of locomotives running the ENS 121 were preparing to go to Enola Yard to pick up a string of freight cars. Leading the consist was Conrail 5044, trailing it was 5052, and trailing it was 5045. All 3 were GE B36-7s. On board the train was engineer Ricky Lynn Gates and brakeman Edward Butch Cromwell. Meanwhile, down the track at Gunpowder Interlocking, where several sidings converged into the main line and a signal, the track switch had been set to the main line for the Amtrak to pass through, and the Conrail was supposed to stop at a signal and wait for the Amtrak to pass. The Conrails were approaching the signal at 60 miles per hour. However, Ricky Lynn Gates ignored several approach signals warning him to slow his train. The brakeman Cromwell also didn't call out these mistakes, and the alerter whistle had been silenced with tape. ENS 121 continued down the track, still going 60 miles an hour. That's 97 kilometers an hour for those of you in Europe. And when the train finally started to approach the actual red signal at the interlocking, Gates finally noticed the last signal, telling him to stop. So, he threw his train into emergency braking. However, due to their speed, the Conrails wouldn't be able to stop in time to avoid overrunning the signal and ending up on the same track as the Amtrak train was on. train rounded a blind curve at 125 miles per hour, and the engineer noticed the Conrail stopped on the track ahead of him. So he slammed on the emergency brakes, but it was already too late. The Amtrak was going 125 miles per hour and had no chance to stop. Terror. That's one word, and one of the only words that can be used to describe the scene. Train cars strewn across the tracks themselves ripped up and torn, thrown all over the place. Electrical lines down, even trees partially downed. The damage from this was horrific. Some of the cars had telescoped into themselves and caused more damage, injuring and killing more people. Here's a picture of Amtrak 94 after the collision on the ground. CR 5052 suffered very severe cab and nose damage. 5044 rolled slightly from the accident scene, suffering minimal damage, and there was nothing left of 5045, which had exploded. The Amtraks didn't fare any better. 903, his front cab was completely destroyed by 5045 exploding, and the rest was thrown to the side of the tracks. The engineer was instantly killed. 900 came to a stop before the Amfleet cars behind it did after 903 was thrown to the side of the tracks and was crushed by the Amfleets as they piled up and jackknifed over it. 16 people died on the Amtrak train, and 164 also on the Amtrak were injured. Now, how did this terrible accident happen? Well, shortly after the accident happened, the U.S. National Transportation Safety Board launched an investigation that would uncover infuriating results. The National Transportation Safety Board quickly surveyed the site of the accident, trying to collect as much data as they could. One of the first things they did was to interview the Conrail crew, who, when asked if they were on drugs or anything, denied it. However, they were still tested. I think we can guess what the test results were. Both Gates and Cromwell tested positive for marijuana. Marijuana is made from the leaves of the cannabis plant, and when abused, marijuana can cause the following symptoms: impaired body movement, impaired short-term memory, euphoria, and difficulty concentrating. However, there's a big difference between two types of marijuana. When eaten, the onset of effects can take up to an hour and a half or 90 minutes. But when smoked, that time is reduced to minutes. Despite the clear evidence that the Conrail crew had been smoking marijuana, Gates tried to lie and say that the signals came too late to warn him. However, after investigators ran several tests of the signals, it was concluded that they were indeed working properly, and Gates was lying. He was found guilty of manslaughter by locomotive and was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison. 5044 survived the collision and in 1999 was sold to CSX when Conrail ceased operations. After a few years' operation on CSX, it was then sold to Brazilian Railroad EFVM and continues to operate as their No. 740 to this day. Despite its severe-looking damage, 5052's frame was intact, and so Conrail rebuilt the locomotive, and also it was sold to CSX in 1999. The locomotive then was also sold to the Brazilian Railroad EVFM and continues to operate as number 744 to this day. 5045 was totally destroyed and was scrapped. Both Amtrak units were also totally destroyed and were scrapped. Maryland train collision was the worst wreck in Amtrak's history for 6 years until 1993, when one Amtrak train crashed off a bridge in Alabama. But that's a story for another time. It's been 35 years since this crash, and hopefully we don't have to see a wreck like this again.